Welcome to the Dream Machine. My name is Arun.
And my name is Patricia.
Hey Patricia, what's going on?
Oh, nothing much, just counting the days of Christmas and looking forward to the discussion of today's episode of Dream Machine.
You know something, Patricia? You know you've seen those stories and at the end they go into far, far away. Well, have you ever actually wondered what far, far away actually is?
No, I've actually never thought of the concept of far, far away. I just assumed that, hey, this is where people go to live their happily ever after.
Yeah, something tells me we need to visit this place.
I agree.
Okay, let's do it. So, Shrek 2 is a 2004 American computer-animated fantasy comedy film produced by DreamWorks Animation Studios and directed by Andrew Adamson, Kelly Asprey, and Conrad Vernon. It is a second installment of the Shrek series, a sequel to 2001 Shrek, and features the voices of Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, Antonio Banderas, Julie Andrews, John Cleese, Rupert Everett, and Jennifer Saunders. So, a very hefty and very bolstering cast to go on with. Like his predecessor, Shrek 2 received largely positive reviews and was a blockbuster success. And I don't know, I would say that saying it was just a blockbuster success, I think is, dare I say, I think it's been an overall success.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you consider that the two previous movies were moderately okay, they had decent budgets and they were able to make decent profits. This one is the complete opposite. This blew everything out of the water.
Yeah, I can see why that is because, I mean, when you're starting off with the story, I mean, I think the great thing about this is that it had a lot of free reign. I think, at least in my opinion, because, I mean, you've seen all those Disney stories where, Snow White will, go off into the sunset with a prince and everything, and they live happily ever after, and, no one actually knows, the fact that kind of, that side of it hasn't been written until, the infamous Disney sequels, no one really kind of knows what that area is like, and I think Shrek 2 had that, ability to, with the groundwork that it started off with in the first film, and also the fact that it could open up the world a lot more. I think it had that liberalism, if you will, to be able to explore so many other possibilities. So.
Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, you essentially have a parody of fairy tales. Like, how much further can you get in terms of, oh, we're going to make fun of Pinocchio, we're going to make fun of the Three Little Pigs, we're going to make fun of, what happily ever after really entails to a story that starts off with one upon a time. But in Shrek 2, they were able to take everything that the first Shrek did and just elevated it so far. And one of the things that I have to mention is that they brought in some new writers for Shrek 2. They do have the writers such as Andrew Adamson and Joe Stillman, who wrote for the first one, and then they brought in the geniuses that are David N. Weiss and J. David Stem. For those who don't know who they are a duo who are known for writing various movies and TV shows. They wrote the screenplays for All Dogs Go to Heaven, the Rugrats movie, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, and so many others. And they've written some of the best episodes of Rugrats, from the Hanukkah special to Mother's Day and so much more. So they know their craft when it comes to writing very touching yet very hilarious episodes or movies. So seeing them into the spotlight in terms of writing for Shrek 2 was a brilliant move.
Mm-hmm. So, the whole idea of this then is Shrek 2. I mean, how would you think dare I say, I think it actually gets it right, off the first bat, because obviously it's you've got poor old you got Prince Charming kind of going in to rescue the princess himself, only to find out it's the wolf that's in the bed rather than her. Like, and I think
Yeah.
that kind of like, well, it's like, oh, she's on his honeymoon. It's like, what with whom? And then we go right into the montage of like,
Yeah. And the montage is great, by the way. You know how you mentioned about like All Star from Smash Mouth kind of fit into it. No, I still disagree with that. I think that this song "Accidentally in Love" is perfect for this scene because it perfectly fits the fact that Shrek was never supposed to have a happily ever after. He was supposed to be like an ogre who was completing his mission of rescuing the princess, delivering it to Lord Farquaad in exchange for getting his swamp back. He never expected to fall in love with the princess and her changing into an ogre like that. And the fact that they're going through their honeymoon just fits it so well. And you have that great montage with, you know, um, them making the ring, which is inspired by Lord of the Rings, the
yep.
being attacked by villagers and going to the beach and various things. It just fits it so well. It just shows that how much Shrek and Fiona have really fallen in love with one another.
And there's a mermaid sis whole thing as well, and he's just her just getting like javelined back into the sea, and that was
Of course, I mean we still need to bring in that jabbing at Disney again, just like in the first movie, and there's a reason why the mermaid looks like Ariel. That was its intent.
yeah. So Shrek and Fiona get back, and we think that it's all just going to be all calm from that. And Donkey has obviously made a complete mess of the house and everything, and sorting out the mail, and also somehow conjuring up some fish that they didn't have, and then not feeding them and like letting them die. Like it's like it's yeah, like you just I don't know. Like, do you think that was a good way of like bringing in Donkey in that way? Because I mean, seeing him like he's massively incompetent. Pretty much like
I think it could have been done better. Like,
yeah.
when Fiona asked Shrek about, hey, where's Dragon? You should be with her. And he's like, oh, we're just going through a bit of a fight right now. She's been a bit moody lately, which we'll find out why in the end credits.
Hmm.
But, and then, he decided, hey, because my dragon wife is acting like a moody person, well, moody dragon, I must say, but very moody. I'm just going to go over to stay with Shrek and Fiona and wait until they get back home. And then they are like, no, we're married now. We want to be alone by ourselves. And Donkey is not really getting the point until like much later on. And yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Donkey is, he's trying to be his usual self of, not wanting to be alone. And I think that they could have done it a little bit better.
Hmm. So we get to the point where then they're interrupted. Everyone's interrupted, surprisingly enough, by these guardsmen who then give a message saying that the king and queen of Far Far Away have wanted to summon both Shrek and Fiona to the castle. So yeah, I like the bit where like they okay, well, what's that song that that trumpet person sings when
That right there is the theme song to Hawaii Five-O.
oh, I-50. Okay, then yeah, because I knew
Yeah,
there was a reference to
now we're
something.
not talking about the remake that came out a few years ago. We're talking about the 1960s version.
Yeah. So then they're obviously summoned to Far Far Away, and then there's some more annoyance from Donkey, which yeah, this is the thing. Like in the first act, Donkey is really an annoyance in this, and
Yeah, I mean, all he does throughout the entire movie is just, asking like, "Are we there yet?" Which I don't know if you ever seen this, Aaron, but this reminded me of the Ramada Inn commercial in the 90s where Bart and Lisa were asking Homer over and over again, "Are we there yet?" And then Homer says no, and then they keep asking it over and over and over again until Homer just yelled out "No!" and he chokes Bart. So that kind of reminded me of that for some strange reason.
Simpsons did it. Well, so
Yeah, Simpson did it, but
mind you, I could bring in. I could bring in there. I could say I could bring in an older reference. Like I remember, like you remember the episode where they did Astro Smurf from the Smurfs, and they
yeah,
saying,
I remember. Yeah, that was when they were trying to introduce like new Smurf characters. Yeah.
yeah, like are we there yet, Papa Smurf? Oh, Smurf up. Like,
Yeah, and then then basically Shrek tells him to please find a way to entertain himself, and then he just goes on and on with these popping noises, like it just annoys him. It's ridiculous.
yeah, I think in like in the original like viewing, at least for me, like when I saw it for the first time, I thought it was funny, but now looking back at it, it's kind of like it's kind of like it weighs very very quickly. I
Yeah, I
think.
mean, how would you like it if I did popping noises while you were trying to talk?
Yeah. Oh my god, that's gonna be you when when we go over to when I come over in March, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I'm gonna do that when we ride on the monorail to Disney World. I'm just gonna be popping in your ears while you're trying to enjoy the announcement about like, welcome to Disney World, welcome to the happiest place on earth, and
Oh,
enjoy the rides and all that stuff. And I'm just gonna be over there, and it's like, hey, Aaron, and you're like, what is it? And I'll be like, and you're like, ah.
oh joy, oh joy.
Look
Anyway,
forward to that.
getting away from Disney and back to DreamWorks. So, finally, they do arrive at far, far away, and it's so basically it's Hollywood. I think pretty
Yeah,
much.
pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's Hollywood Boulevard. It's pretty much this. And they're throwing like on top of that, you also get not like a direct introduction, but you also get to find out about the Fairy Godmother at the very beginning. Like thinking, yeah, she's in this. And but surprisingly enough, like she's just kind of like there. She's not really like announced yet as like
No,
she's
no,
gonna
you
be a.
just see the billboard. That's pretty much it. I mean, you're just looking around far, far away, and you see like, oh, this is where Rapunzel lives. This is where Cinderella lives. This is all the stores, and it plays to the song "Funky Town." And you're just like looking at everything, and then you hear Shrek saying, we're definitely not in the swamp anymore, referencing the Wizard of Oz. You kind of miss that little detail of the fairy godmother because you're just surrounded. You're just like seeing a different world because we only had Duloc in the first movie where it was just, you had the castle and then you had nothing but forest. But now we're in this like giant city filled with celebrities of fairy tale characters, and it's definitely completely different that you don't really remember the fairy godmother too much until later on when
It
she
makes me
introduces
it
herself to
makes me
Fiona.
wonder in the first film. I think they probably should have like at least referenced it once. Like one and,
Well,
like,
I
and
mean,
then
like I said before, I mean they use different writers for the from the first Shrek movie to the second. So
yeah.
they the first I don't think that they really had the idea of fairy godmother. I mean, remember, they didn't think that this movie was going to be a huge success as it
I was
was.
gonna say because it was used as kind of like I don't want to say this about them, but kind of like the trash receptacle for like people that they thought weren't pulling their weight for other projects, wasn't it? So like, so basically they were kind of like moved over to the Shrek project, like if they weren't
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah.
As mentioned earlier, that they wanted Prince of Egypt to be their magnum opus, and anybody who were, not doing very well working, then they would just move to the bunkers to work on Shrek. Shrek was essentially their punishment project. So, yeah, like I mentioned before, very similar to Pocahontas and The Lion King, in which Pocahontas was supposed to be their A project and Lion King was their B project. It turned out to be the other way around. Blah blah blah. You already know about this, but
Yeah.
yeah, with
Mind you, it kinda,
Spirit and what was I going to say? Now remember, Spirit and Sinbad. They were moderately successful, but they weren't huge hits. This was around the point in which they kind of put two and two together. It's like, okay, 2D animation is not making as much money anymore. 3D animation is where it's at. So, what movie was a huge financial success and won them an Oscar? Shrek. So
yeah.
they decided, you know what? Let's continue this cash cow of Shrek and let's make a sequel.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we get to the point where they get to the castle and they finally meet the king and queen, who happen to be Fiona's mother and father, and they're shocked to find out that Fiona is actually now fully transformed into an ogre, and that's that she's ended up with another ogre, which is Shrek, and so that pretty much shocks everyone in the court, and pretty much sets the tone for like probably the next couple of minutes of the film. So it's so yeah, like then you get the whole thing around the table, and also all the awkwardness through that, and yeah, I just think not much else really to comment on. Really, it is kind of like I don't know, like it kind of makes me feel like we've kind of have seen this somewhat before. I guess
Yeah,
in
it's,
films.
it's a reference to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, in which the girl who's white and whose family was very, very racist, brings home her boyfriend who just so happens to be black. So essentially, you have Fiona, whom the parents were expecting to be broken off of the spell and to be married to Prince Charming. No, she's an ogre and she's married to one, and they just are really dismissive of it, which it makes a lot of sense because they're from royalty and they don't really know too much about the outside world other than just their cozy little palace. Although later on it turns out that the king is a bit of a hypocrite, but yeah, we'll get to that. But I'm really appreciative with the fact that the queen is very open to Fiona being an ogre and for her married to Shrek. I do like the fact that she's trying to get the family to stay together together because they've been separated for so long.
Hmm. So, dinner is a disaster. Fiona storms away in a huff, and then obviously we hear that the king has actually wanted Prince Charming to be the one who actually saves Fiona from the tower, and then we find out that the fairy godmother is actually the mother of Prince Charming. So it all sort of the kind of the plot starts to come together at this point, where it's kind of like, yeah, you kind of see what's going on here. Like
Yeah, so
yeah.
essentially, King Harold had hired the fairy godmother to essentially, send Fiona into the tower so that she can be eventually rescued by Prince Charming. But Prince Charming got there a little too late. By the time that Prince Charming was able to arrive at, the castle and rescue Fiona, Shrek already rescued her. So they're kind of really pissed off that, hey, now Shrek and Fiona are married, and Fiona's an ogre, so their agreement has pretty much just broken off, and that's when they have that little tuffle about that King Harold has to find a way for Shrek and Fiona to break up, and eventually that Prince Charming and Fiona would get married, and essentially she wants to stick with the agreement that they had planned for, because there's a bit of a secret between the fairy godmother and King Harold.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder. The only thing I was saying, why was Prince Charming so goddamn late? Yeah,
Yeah,
'cause you
yeah.
think
Like,
about
I
it.
mean, where
This
did he come from? I mean, I'm actually curious. If he actually came from far, far away and traveled over to the tower, then yeah, like I'm actually curious about like how far away is the tower compared to Duloc into the tower? Because we saw that Shrek and Donkey were able to walk all the way to the tower in like what, a couple of days or
I
so,
think it
but it
was.
took
I think it was
Prince
like two.
Charming
I
like
think it was like 2 days
I,
if you count the stay in the windmill. But I think yeah, like it does kind of feel a bit bizarre because it was kind of like what Shrek and Donkey got to the tower in pretty much no time, or at least in the journey going forward, they seem to get there in no time flat. And then
yeah, and we saw from the distance from Duloc all the way to Far Far Away, it's like over 500 miles. So if we can assume that it takes that long to get all the way to Far Far Away, then I'm sure that the tower and Far Far Away are like much further distance. So I'm actually curious about like why didn't the fairy godmother, like, I don't know, poof Prince Charming a little bit closer? I mean, and he wasn't even riding on horseback, which means he should have gotten there faster and sooner.
yeah, like I say that bit doesn't make much sense. Like, wouldn't you like teleport Prince Charming right to the tower, pretty much, and say, and okay, like let him go fight the dragon or whatever, and obviously to prove himself. But besides that, yeah, there's quite a few holes I think in that whole explanation, and
Yes, and as mentioned earlier, we know that the for the most part, the writers from the first movie were not brought into the second, with the exception of Joe Stillman. So yeah, I guess we can say that this is kind of like one of the many plot holes we're going to be seeing in the Shrek franchise.
hmm So it gets to the point where we are introduced to Puss from Puss in Boots, and or Puss in, is it Puss in Boots or is it just Puss?
Yeah, it's no, it's Puss in
Here's
Boots.
Puss in Boots. So he's hired to basically to kill off Shrek, and doesn't really go as well. And yeah, that bit was kind of weird. It was kind of like they kind of like said, "Oh, you go off to this walk to this bush that kind of looks like Shirley Bassey or something like that," and then yeah, which then we just get this whole showdown, I guess, of that, and then I can't remember what the resolution was.
I
Uh,
mean, the resolution was that when Shrek eventually captured him, he's like, "Oh, do you think we should skin him alive, or maybe something?" And then Puss was basically begging him, "No, please, please, don't kill me, don't skin me." I think they were actually thinking about like taking away his testicles.
and
But yeah, essentially he was begging them, please, don't do it. My mother's sick. My father lives off the garbage. The king sent me to kill you and I needed the money or something. And then Shrek put two and two together. It's like, oh, the king wasn't sending me over to the forest to have a father son hunt. He was sending me over to get killed by a cat.
yeah,
So basically that was I mean, yeah, the Puss as an antagonist is over pretty quickly.
Hmm. So that leads then to Shrek saying that he needs to. I think he needs to like change himself. So is that the bit where we get to the fairy godmother's potion
Yes,
shop? And
this is
so
when we get to the fairy godmother. Yeah, they want to find a way so that Shrek can be able to be more proper to make not only the king and queen happy, but to make Fiona happy. Because earlier in the movie, we didn't even mention this about like the first introduction with the fairy godmother and Fiona, which is actually one of the best moments in the movie, where Fiona is like being bombarded with the fairy godmother of riches and nice clothes and all that stuff, but Fiona doesn't really want it. And then we have that argument with Shrek and Fiona talking about like, you should try to be a little bit more nicer to my parents. You're acting like an ogre. And then Shrek says, well, news for you, princess. I am an ogre and nothing's going to change that. And then she says, I changed a lot for you, Shrek. And then he thought, okay, in order to make Fiona happy, I have to change as well. So he's thinking about changing in a way that would make the king and queen Fiona happy. So that's when he decides to go over to the fairy godmother's cottage.
yeah, what do you think of that small dog that I guess magics up by the fairy godmother? That's kind of like in the background, I guess, and
Oh, you mean the Bichon?
yeah.
It's a nice joke, but it's not really like there for that much, to
No,
be
it's
quite honest.
just there to wake up Fiona, I think, just to find out that she's actually no longer an ogre anymore, pretty much. So
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah. So that pretty much goes down. So Shrek finds out that he's now human, and then Fiona finds out that she's herself again. And well, what was her? That's kind of weird. Like you kind of what's the like is the ogre? It's kind of like feeling like between like which out of Fiona, the ogre Fiona and the other Fiona, like which one's like would you consider like the real Fiona?
That's a good question because remember, Fiona was originally a human,
Mhm.
but she was turned by an ogre, by an evil witch when she was a little girl. I mean, basically, ogres are described as, human beings that are monsters, essentially. They're man-like that, just so happen to be monsters, very similar to like a cyclops or something. So yeah, the an ogre is probably the closest to like a human being in terms of like their size and their depictions of having like normal limbs and a face and other such that men do have. So yeah, the change from an ogre to a human is not like that drastically different, but I would say that for Fiona, she was a human. She was just turned into an ogre like a little bit later on in her life when she was young. So, but as
Yeah.
for Shrek seeing him as a human, yeah, that was like a little bit strange at first, but then you just kind of like get used to it after a while.
Yeah. So they also there's something about True Love's first kiss that's also in there as well. That they got to be he's got to kiss Fiona like I think before night or something like that.
Yeah,
Or
before midnight.
before midnight.
Stereotypical fairy tale mumbo jumbo about like, you have to do this before midnight or something like that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, basically that because Shrek and Fiona are human, if they want to make the potion's power permanent, then they have to kiss each other, which is not going to be easy because now we have the fairy godmother locking Shrek away, and the Prince Charming is essentially trying to impersonate himself as Shrek so he can get closer to Fiona.
Yeah, and I just think that's I just don't know that actually is that a bit clever or is that a bit stupid? I don't know.
I think
Like
it's clever because basically, Fiona doesn't know what Shrek looked like before the potion, and so her,
but
be,
he
you
wouldn't
know,
he wouldn't know what he was as a character because I mean she married him for God's sakes. Like
well, I mean, true, but then she also never met Prince Charming either, and so she'll mention, when Prince Charming mentioned about like, the potion made a bunch of different changes, but not how I feel about you. So for her being completely fooled by it makes a lot of sense because she didn't even know that she was able to transform into a human again by a potion, and then when she saw Donkey as a stallion, yeah, he looked completely different than before. So that kind of makes sense. And then with the fairy godmother, talking to Shrek about like ogres don't live happily ever after, they're always considered to be like the bad guys. Again, that makes a lot of sense because All Shrek wants to do is to make Fiona happy, and the fact that in fairy tales, ogres are the bad guys and they live miserable lives, and he feels that the only way to make Fiona happy is to go away from, her life and just live back the way he was as an ogre. Although that would be kind of weird because, I mean, I'm sure that the fairy godmother would have found a way to make them stay human, but remember, with Fiona not like seeing the Shrek as like from Prince Charming's perspective, it like being a huge facade. It's like, yeah, I'm sure that eventually she would have gotten the gist of it, but then we have that little bit of a plot element in which then she decides that she's going to give King Harold a love potion that whoever that she kisses that she'll fall in love with. So to make it a little bit more permanent, even though I'm sure for Shrek's case he would have reverted back to an ogre by midnight anyway.
So we get the bit, but there's some of that as well. Like the king has second thoughts after doing that because then he switches the cups and gives her the wrong tea, and so then she ends up drinking like pretty much the wrong cup of tea after that. So when you sort of snuck that in. So Shrek gets arrested, and funnily enough, it actually gets put in this cop show, which is a parody
I thought
of
that
cops.
was hilarious, by the way.
Oh my
And
god!
they're using a pepper mill to kind of like calm him down, which I guess makes sense because there's no like pepper spray or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I was about that as well. Like they search one of the they search Puss in Boots and like they find catnip on him, and he says, "That's not mine." It's like oh, that was hilarious. So, so we get to the point where Gingy and sorry, so we get to the point where all the characters, Pinocchio, Gingy, and the rest, and Three Little Pigs, all find out that they're in trouble, and so they need to go rescue them. And so that's then we get the Mission Impossible, parody as well in that as well. And
and the fact that Pinocchio wears a thong.
Yeah, which I have to say is going to be done. I think that Mission Impossible parody is going to be doing a lot better than when we finally visit the Lorax. So let me say we say that.
Well, guess what? We're not visiting the Lorax. Lorax is Illumination Entertainment, so we saved ourselves from that monstrosity.
Believe me, they'll want us to look at the Illumination films at some point.
There's not really that much Illumination films. There's only like a handful of them, and we'll probably like tackle them in like maybe 2 months, but not enough to like dedicate so much. But even so, I don't want to watch the Lorax.
Give it time, Patricia. Give it time. We're just waiting for those comments to come in. But so obviously we get the rescue from that, and then we get this strange scene with where they go to the Muffin Man to create a giant gingerbread man named Mongo.
Yeah,
and so they pretty much do like the whole Godzilla. So then the next film they're parodying is Godzilla.
Yeah, pretty much so. And, and then, of course, we cannot forget about what may be one of the most infamous scenes in Shrek 2 when, the fairy godmother sings, I need a hero. And then we have that huge montage with Shrek trying to get into the castle and Princess Fiona and Prince Charming dancing. And it has become like really synonymous in Shrek 2 as like one of the best
I love
scenes.
I love while the gingerbread man's walking around, over the city that, there's some people that were like in Starbucks and then just run into the next Starbucks across the street.
Although that joke is really, really funny. There's not as much Starbucks in every corner as it once was,
Yeah, it's like it has started to scale back a little bit, hasn't it? So actually it would probably make it funny now if they mind you. I'm not saying they should remaster it, but I think maybe if they like put in like a Costa coffee or something like that, like like a rival coffee chain or something like that. Just say, oh look, they're all surrounded by coffee stores. They're all part of the change. Like,
that'd be funny.
Yeah. So so they finally get into into the ball, and obviously shenanigans happen after that, and it's the point where it's finally revealed that the king slipped Fiona the wrong tea, and that the spell is basically null and void, and then there's this whole fight with the Fairy Godmother, and imagine I thought the defeating of the Fairy Godmother was a bit anticlimactic because she was trying to like wish someone away, and then she ended up like hitting herself, and then she kind of like poofed into a puff of smoke before she could, do anything. So I thought, I
Yeah.
don't know. There was a part of me that felt a bit, like I would accept if like she like got warped into another dimension or something like that, and then obviously there's the threat that she could potentially come back. But the fact that she just vanished, I just thought
Yeah,
was a
she's
bit.
gone, which means I'm actually curious because she was like the biggest in terms of magic distribution. So would that mean that if with her gone, I'm actually curious about like how far away would react to it, you know?
Yeah, like it's be kind of strange.
Like
I
they
guess.
cannot rely on magic to make their happily ever afters. They have to work for it.
Mind you, I guess you could say the same reaction. I guess you could say to Coco when they find out that I've forgotten his name already. That he's not actually the guy who
Oh,
created the songs.
oh
Like
yeah, yeah, I
yeah,
remember.
forget him. But
De la
yes,
Cruz, that's what it
oh,
was.
Cruz, yeah. So, Shrek and Fiona re-engage, and then obviously they have a massive celebration at the very end, which
Yeah, which I really do like two things. I do like the little plot twist, very similar to how in the first movie the plot twist was that Fiona was an ogre. So the second plot twist is that King Harold is actually the Frog Prince.
hmm and so
So we
yeah,
do get like slight hints of it, very similar to in the first movie. We did get slight hints about Fiona being an ogre, like the magic mirror tries to warn Lord Farquaad that something happens at night, and the fact that Fiona tries to hide herself in sunset, and the fact that she likes the same foods as Shrek. In the second movie, we have slight hints about King Harold being the Frog Prince, like their entire like when you see their bedroom their everything's green, like there's the green sheets, there's a picture of a lily pad in the background. There was even a story about when um the queen mentions about like, you remember when we first met where we kissed by the lily pond. And then we have the final one, which is when he goes over to the poison apple, and there's a female frog who asks the king, do I know you? And then he's like, no, no, I'm sorry, you must be confusing me with somebody else. So there were hints about him being the Frog Prince.
yeah, it was building up to that point, wasn't it? When it was
Hmm.
getting to that, which I think was good, because like it was nice to put the subtle hints in the background, and and for those who might not be familiar with the Frog Prince, it was kind of like it was a nice, a little arc to kind of like follow along with the Shrek and Fiona and that angle. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
good.
And another thing that I do like is that Shrek actually asks Fiona, like when midnight hits and they have like 1 minute to decide about whether they stay human or to turn back into ogres. He asks Shrek, Fiona, is this what you want? Because when you kiss me, we can be humans forever. And so then Fiona makes the decision that she wants to stay as an ogre because that was who she fell in love with in Shrek. She saw Shrek. She already loved Shrek as an ogre, so she didn't need to change back into a human.
hmm So, yeah, pretty much we get to the credits, and there is an additional thing put in the end of the credits, I believe, and that
Yes.
is when the dragon announces that she's been pregnant this entire time, and now they have these kind of like donkey dragon dronky babies, I think they call them.
Yeah, drunky babies. Yeah, which it will play a little bit more in the third movie, which we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But that was why she was moody throughout the entire time, was because she was pregnant, and then they give birth to the dragon donkey hybrid babies. And
I had no idea that's how. I mean, again, this is Shrek World, so but mind you,
yeah, this is Shrek World. I mean,
although genetics would have just said, okay, well, it'll make some dragons and some donkeys, and so
yeah, I have no idea how a cold-blooded, dragon who's essentially like a lizard would mate with a mammal. I
well,
mean, I've seen like
let me
experiment.
safely say this. I think the crudes are starting to make a lot of sense. I think when you think about it. So yeah,
Sure.
if that's how this world operates, then fine. Drunkies. So
Dronkies, yeah. I think that for the most part, the one thing that I wasn't really too crazy about was the song that they chose in the credits was "Livin' La Vida Loca" by Ricky Martin. I can praise this soundtrack forever. Like almost every single song fits so well. I think that the reason why they chose that song was because it was like one of the most popular songs at the time.
Well, on
It
top
didn't
of that
really
as
fit
well,
in.
I think it's because they had Antonio Banderas as Puss in Boots, and I think because it was kind of like a Spanish theme kind of like song. I think with Ricky Martin, I guess. I think you could. I think that's probably one of the other reasons why they probably chose it as well. I mean, like,
I know, but I felt like they could have chose something a little bit better. I don't know.
well, I was going to say this. At least they didn't do a parody of like, will the real Slim Shady please stand up? And like they did that with like Fiona saying, will the real Fiona please transform? Something like that. Like,
Oh
I,
God,
I,
no.
I think there's worse ways to go. I think in that era. I think so. But
Yeah,
hey,
fair enough.
yeah,
But yeah, there was actually another thing. If you actually got Shrek on DVD, that they actually had the Fairy Idol.
yeah.
You know, they
Which was
basically
hosted by
Far Far Away Idol. I'm sorry,
yeah. So
because Fairy Idol is the Fairly Odd Parents special. But yeah, Far Far Away Idol, and they had Simon Cowell as one of the judges.
yeah, and so Simon Cowell makes a guest appearance in this, and it's kind of a bit out of nowhere, really. Like,
To be fair, this was when American Idol was like really, really popular.
it was, and on top of that as well, Simon Cowell's also doing Pop Idol here as well in the UK. So there was, I would justify there was a good reason to do it. I'm just quite surprised that they didn't put this in like the end of the credits. I would have thought, because I mean, looking at the running time of Shrek, I mean, okay, it's 93 minutes, but I mean, like you could have stuck that in, like made it like
I guess
sorry,
it's very
sorry.
similar to if you ever got like the VHS version of Shrek, in which they added in like them singing a whole bunch of songs
Oh, the
like
dance
after the
party.
wedding.
Yeah, the dance
So I
party.
guess they were trying to do that, but yeah, essentially that we have the end credits where Shrek and Fiona decide to become ogres, and everything goes well and far, far away, and everybody lives happily ever after until Shrek the Third, which we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much Shrek, and dare I say, at the moment, I feel like it's my favorite Shrek. It's my favorite DreamWorks film at the moment. So, but
I can see that. It was able to take everything that Shrek was able to do and just elevate it so much. And from what I understand, it was like the highest grossing animated film until Toy Story 3 came along.
and so for me, I think Shrek, at least so far. I mean, like I got to be honest, we've still got some other DreamWorks films to come in, so maybe there might be a wild card that comes in and say, oh hey, that's my favorite DreamWorks film. So
Unfortunately, it's not going to be for next week, because next week on Dream Machine, we're going to be talking about what many people consider to be the worst DreamWorks movie of the bunch, and that is Shark Tale.
wow, what a dramatic climate! Well, what an anticlimactic way that we're going to finish off.
Well, not
This
necessarily,
time.
because we still, yes, we do have Shark Tale, but we'll also have one more Dream Machine for 2018, but we're going to save that until Christmas.
Yeah. So from me, Aaron,
And Patricia.
take care and bye for now.
See you later.